everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Objection Psychology, the podcast where we interrogate the human mind through a legal lens. I'm Lazaro, your host and guide through the strange world of cognition and courtroom drama. Today's episode is going to be a mind bender. We're going to be talking about false memories, as we mentioned last week, and the dangers that they pose in a legal setting, especially with eyewitness testimonies. This poses a question: can you really trust what you remember? And more importantly, should the courts trust what you remember or what you allegedly remember? As we tried before, I'm going to try to separate this episode into 5 different segments. They both dive into each sort of section that we're going to be talking about today, but it's all going to be related to memory and how it correlates to the courtroom, and are false memories a thing that happen in courtrooms in actual cases? So we're going to dive right into it. Our first segment is going to be a case file of the Ronald Cotton misidentification. So for the start, let me just take you back to 1984. In 1984, North Carolina, there was a man named Ronald Cotton who was wrongfully convicted of rape based on a confident eyewitness. That eyewitness's name is Jennifer Thompson. She picked him from a lineup and testified in court. But guess what happened years later? DNA evidence proved Cotton's innocence, and the real perpetrator was Bobby Poole. And Jennifer wasn't lying. She was sure, but her memory was wrong, and that's what makes this case so powerful. It wasn't a malicious lie, it was a false memory. And so speaking more of this case, Jennifer identified Ronald Cotton and sort of misidentified him for this man named Bobby Poole. And upon looking at the pictures, if you want to look it up, they actually both look eerily similar. And this happens a lot in recent cases. This is just one of the cases that it's happened in. But in more recent time, especially in the sexual assault or just regular assault cases, it's very hard to sort of know the truth sometimes on who the perpetrator is, because whenever you're going based off eyewitness, really anything and anybody could be mentioned. That takes us now into our segment 2. Now that we've identified a relating case of a false memory being used, let's unpack what are false memories. So a false memory is a recollection of something that didn't actually happen or happened differently than we remember. And here's the kicker: they often just feel as real as true memories do. To sort of give like a textbook definition, we're going to be looking at Dr. Elizabeth Loftus' definition of false memories. She describes it in her journal of Planting Misinformation in the Human Mind in the Learning and Memory Journal as a psychological phenomenon where a person recalls something that did not occur or recalls it differently from how it actually happened. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, who, by the way, is a pioneer in this field, ran experiments where people were led to believe that they'd been lost in a mall as a child. About 25% of these people remember this fictional event, complete with vivid detail. Why, you may ask? Because a memory isn't necessarily a video recording. It's reconstructive. Each time we call something or we recall it, we alter it slightly, like opening and resaving a file. So, for example, if you're opening and resaving a file on your computer, you might open it, but the date that it was opened now changes. So you're changing the file slightly without even looking at it, even if you're just opening and closing it. And whenever you add suggestive police questioning, leading questions, or even line of procedures, memory can become contaminated. So if you go and you get asked a bunch of questions in probably high stressful situations, it can lead to you changing sort of how you recall the events to sort of comfort you in a way and make it in a way that's comfortable for you to say. And this happens a lot. Stress and pressure is one of the leading causes of how people are able to sort of switch up their stories. If somebody feels uncomfortable about what they're about to say or about how the story is, or maybe they're just stressed in general, it might lead them to sort of change up the story a little bit, intentionally and unintentionally, depending on their true intentions. This leads us to, and by the way, before I move forward, I'm just gonna really quick, for those who might not know, I'm gonna say the definition of a leading question. And a leading question, according to ABA, which is the American Psychological Association, this definition was accessed in 2025. You can access this definition and many others that I talk about in this podcast on the website. But a leading question is a question that suggests to a particular answer or contains the information the examiner is looking to have confirmed. So that might help you understand, right, what leading questions are and how they get sort of alter how a person perceives it and, their stress levels. So, like, if you're asked by a police officer, like, hey, what information do you have about this case? That might sort of jog your memory. And depending on how you feel about that case, you might be inclined or not inclined. You might unintentionally do it. You might be inclined to sort of change how that series of events actually happened. This now takes us into our third segment, which is going to be the legal fallout of a faulty eyewitness. This is where things really going to heat up. Eyewitness testimony is still one of the most persuasive types of evidence in the courtroom. Juries love a confident eyewitness. But according to the Innocence Project, eyewitness misidentification is a factor in nearly 70% of wrongful convictions, which are then later overturned by DNA evidence. That is a remarkably huge margin. This, by the way, this statistic was accessed in the Innocence Project 2025 in the Eyewitness Misidentification Journal. Judges and juries often equate confidence with accuracy, but confidence can be manufactured through feedback like, for example, good, you picked a subject. Suddenly, the witness is more sure than ever, especially after this reassurance. But here's another twist. Stress and trauma, for example, like being attacked, actually reduce memory accuracy. As I was saying earlier, those are probably the two main feelings that can sort of jog your memory in a specific situation. The brain's fight or flight mode floods us with adrenaline, which sharpens some memories, but at the same time, fogs others. So in a courtroom, the witness might be the most traumatized and the least reliable, as they're probably dealing with both stress and trauma. And now that takes us to our fourth segment, which is going to be, courtroom Q&A. So the actual process of asking these individuals the questions and how they're able to answer it and how false memory plays into effect into this Q&A. And this poses a question. Can therapy create false memories? Speaking of questions, we're going to be talking about a listener question. And this is going to be from Drew in Sarasota. And he asked, Lazaro, I heard about people recovering childhood abuse memories in therapy. Are those reals? And that's a great and tricky question. This gets into recovered memory therapy, a controversial practice. Some therapists use hypnosis or suggestion to help clients recover forgotten trauma. The issue is that these methods can accidentally implant false memories instead. So, to answer your question, people recovering childhood abuse memories in therapy, are they real? The answer is yes and no. So, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, earlier in this episode, it sort of depends. If the memory is a false memory, obviously it's only going to be able to be recovered through accessing that false memory, whether it be through lucid dreams, active therapy, and sort of facing that false memory. However, if it's forgotten trauma, therapists might be more inclined to use hypnosis or, like I've said, just face the issue in order to recover from this past trauma. A sense of therapy, for example, or a term that I'm going to use, and it's a type of therapy that works a lot for this, it's going to be the recovered memory therapy, otherwise abbreviated as RMT. And RMT is going to be a therapeutic practice aiming to retrieve forgotten traumatic memories, sometimes criticized for producing false memories through suggestion. And this is according to McNally, Remembering Trauma, through the Harvard University Press Journal. Courts are cautious with RMT cases today because of the high-profile false allegation scandals in the 1990s. Today, as we all probably already know, most psychologists agree that genuine trauma can be forgotten, but recovered memories should be verified independently whenever possible. And that's a major distinction. Recovered memories are very different from genuine trauma, as genuine trauma is something more chronic, where recovered memory sort of just comes and goes. With that being said, we're going to dive into our final verdict, sort of like just to conclude, summarize what we talked about in today's episode. And to sort of sum it up, memory isn't truth. It's storytelling. Our brains fill in gaps, smooth over contradictions, and sometimes fabricate whole scenes. Something that you may see in your dream, that you might dream and dream all over again for 5 days straight, might eventually become a memory. And some of these disturbing memories are the ones that we see a lot of the time in these false testimonies. Sometimes, previous trauma can trigger a new memory. And due to the amount of trauma that the previous memory caused, it might incline this person to speak up and go to authorities about what they saw in their memory, or in this case, their false memory, which was in turn their dream. With that being said, eyewitness testimony can be valuable, but it must be tested and not just trusted blindly. As courts slowly embrace psychological science, the hope is to prevent wrongful convictions and to protect the integrity of justice. Because in the end, if memory can lie, we must be brave enough to question it. With that being said, folks, that's going to be all for this week on Objection Psychology. Like I've said in previous episode, guys, if you've got a case, concept, or question that you want us to dive into, send it in. I'm always open to anything, open to feedback. I appreciate everybody for downloading. I appreciate everybody for listening to the podcast, putting it in their favorites. That always helps a lot. And I hope, as always, that I was able to aid in your pursuit of knowledge. As I've said before, my email's down in the description. Always leave it on there. If you have anything that you want me to say, go ahead and email me. I'm open to anything. And, I appreciate you, Drew from Sarasota. I appreciate you sending the question. With that being said, everybody, remember to always stay curious, stay critical, and as always, objection sustained.